Hi, this is Dave Windhorst, visual effects artist currently based out of Vancouver. Today we're going to talk about camera projections, mainly how to create them in the typical manual way, as well as show you some new scripts I've written to easily and quickly create those camera projections, as well as allow some advanced features to be carried on with those projections. So we've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. So first things first, if you go over to my website and you download the camera projection set version 1-1, you'll get a folder that contains the icons, the actual Python script, and of course an init and a menu file in order to set these up in your .nuke folder, as well as a readme. If you haven't followed a tutorial before on how to set up scripts, or you just starting out with Nuke, you have to find your .nuke folder, which I cover in my first tutorial on installing and customizing the Nuke interface. So once we've installed our scripts and we've started up Nuke, we can come in here to our program. So I've got a file already set up. So essentially I've got this scene where I've got a piece of geometry that has a basic texture of a checkerboard placed on here for now. And if I scrub through, I see that it lines up and everything, and it works all right, but I've decided that somewhere over in this area I actually need to project that checkerboard straight on this frame, so frame 250. So initially, if we go over into our 3D viewport, we can see we've got a tracked camera available to us, and we have our geometry that has been created to represent the water in this particular scene. So initial image, and then where we've overlaid our geometry. So again, this requires some sort of geometry, whether or not it can be created in another application or created in Nuke itself, as well as the camera, which is just a 3D tracked camera, or it can be an animated camera, something out of Maya or 3ds Max. Just essentially we just need to get an animated camera. So I'm working with a camera I've brought in from an FBX file. So first things we would typically do to create a camera projection is we would go to the frame that we're wanting to project on. So I'm going to say frame 250. I'm going to remove my texture here. I am then going to copy and paste my camera. So I've made a camera 2, which is an exact replica of my camera 1. I'm going to disable the read from file, so now it's grabbing frames, and as you can see, it's animated across the entire timeline. This isn't what we want, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to get rid of all the animation that's available on our camera. So I've removed all the animation on this page, and I'm removing all the animation on this tab. So as you can see, I go through, I have no more animation on any of my slots, and the values that have been kept inside our translate and our rotate represent this frame 250. So if I were to scrub forward, you can see we've got a camera that's moving, which is our camera 1, and we have this camera 2, which is now sitting still on frame 250. So when we can confirm this by moving to frame 250, and as you can see, our cameras now line up over each other. So now that our camera has been made, I'm going to add it to the scene so that way we can still see it. And the next thing we would do is we would come in here and create a project 3D node, and this node has two inputs. We have a camera that it's using for the projection, so this is the camera that the projection is based on, and then the other one is the texture, so in this case it's going to be our gradient, and then its output goes to the geometry. So as we can now see, I'm now projecting our texture at frame 250. So if I scrub through, the texture doesn't move or anything, and we can confirm this by going back over to our 2D view And as you can see on frame 250, because we're using a checkerboard, on frame 250 it looks like our checkerboard texture is square. And that's because we're projecting from this frame and we're recording back through our camera at the same frame, so essentially we're seeing what we're projecting at the same time. However, if I go at, over here towards the beginning, you can see I can clearly see the distortion that occurs because of the projection onto the geometry. So again, that's the typical manual way, and that's good and everything, but of course, in the workplace, time is everything, as well as sometimes you just, you need to go in and refix this camera, like you've realized it's the wrong frame you're projecting on, and you can't. You have to go back and copy and paste and go through the steps again. So I've written a few scripts that allow us to, change it up and just, bypass a lot of these tedious steps and move on to getting where we actually need to be. So the first one we're going to do under these cameras is a camera project current frame. So what that requires is us to select a camera, at the minimum one camera, and optionally we can select a texture that we're going to project. So in this case it would be our grade node. So I'm going to select these two. I'm going to go over to my cameras menu and go to camera project current frame. I'm going to select it, let it work, and already it's created a projection camera. So if you notice, this one's called ProjCam S. So this is a single frame that we've created a projection camera for. So I come over here into Nuke, and you can see we have a projection camera. And as you can see, this projection camera was created on the frame that we were currently viewing in our viewer timeline. So if I zoom in here, I can see at frame 9 on my ProjCam, that's when we established this. And I can just quickly connect up my geometry to my Project 3D, and you can see we've already gotten essentially the same as we did with the manual method. Of course, though, we bypassed having to copy and create the camera and remove the animation from it. That's already been done. So this in itself is just a straight up mimic of the regular method. We've just created a new camera node type, ProjCam S. So that stands for singular. So that's a single frame that we've created this for, and again, it acts just like the manual way. It's a little bit faster. If I decide this isn't what I need, I can go back to that frame 50, select my camera, select my texture, run it again, and connect up my image to my geometry, and you can see, very quickly we've done it again. So that's great and everything, but then we run into another issue. Sometimes when we're camera projecting, we actually want to camera project multiple frames such that we're doing a frame range. This can happen if you're dealing with moving objects that you need to follow a little bit more in terms of the camera to the object's relation in order to project. And so we've created a second one here for us to use, and that is under here, camera project source. And the difference is when I select my texture and my camera and I select that command, I've created a new setup, so it's close to what we had before. We've got the Project 3D node, it's already connected, but the difference is we have a ProjCam M, which stands for multiple, and as you can see, it's expression linked to the original camera, the source camera. So if I come over here, you can see we're actually grabbing our values from our source camera at the frame that we're currently on. So we're at frame, looks like around 139, 129. Okay, yeah, so down here in our label it says frame 129. So on frame 129 is when this was initially created. However, you'll notice another thing that's different about this camera projection note is we've included a frame settings tab. So if we come over here, we're actually telling a few items here. We've got a projected frame. So this value is representing what frame the projection camera is currently based on. And since it's expression linked to the source camera, we can come in here and say frame 125 is actually where we wanted it, and you can see it updated. If I say frame 5, the camera shifts to frame 5. But as you can see, if I scrub through, our Proj camera is not actually moving. We've only just established a new frame for it to rest on. So if I say, frame 300 is where I want my camera to be, I can either type it in and it goes straight to 300. So if I'll connect this up and make it a little bit easier to see. I can go to that frame. I can say actually frame 79, and you can see it's automatically updated. Another way is if we're moving around really quickly, I can say on frame 150, instead of typing it in, I can just set current frame, and it will automatically adjust to that frame. Frame 250, it'll adjust. Because of this being able to be changed, you can quickly change this value. Let's say you want to set this value permanently, then we've got this lock unlock frame, so you can quickly lock it, and that way no one can touch this. This value is set right now. You can't go in here and modify where that camera is at. You can't modify these properties because they're expression linked. So, obviously someone who knows what they're doing could potentially go in there and change it, but this is just for quick, setup and lockdown. That way you're not worrying about accidentally changing the values. Of course, you can go click this again to unlock it in case you need to make that change again. So you can do that multiple times. So the final button we have here is a bake frame. So right now we've got an expression-based link set up. And I'm actually going to copy this camera for use later. So I'm going to still work with this original one we've got. And I decide, frame 227 is exactly where I need to be. I can lock it, keep that running. But then I just find that the problem I run into is I've got an expression link here. So Nuke is obviously doing some work and trying to copy all the values from this camera one, bring it over to the projection camera, running it out to the projection. It gets tedious, and if you've got a lot of these, not only do you build up a lot of expression arrows in your Nuke tree that can cause some havoc, you also have Nuke slowing down because it's obviously processing more. So if we are happy with what we have set up, we can actually click this bake frame, and we can specify the frame in which we want to bake. So I'm just going to say a single frame, so I'm just going to say 211 is where we're at, and if I bake it, I've now placed my camera specifically at that frame. Everything's set. So another example I want to point out with this camera is we have some options open to us since we have this projected frame value. And that I've covered. If you look over in the README file at the very end, I've got 3 interesting results to try, just to show you how versatile this is and how we've got some more advanced options. So if I come into our add expression for our projected frame, if I just type in frame, what this is telling Nuke is the projected frame value should be the viewer frame value. So right now the result is 202 since I'm on that frame. Hit OK. So as you can see, by setting it to frame, I've quickly established on every frame the projected frame should update. So essentially I'm mimicking the original camera. Now this only works, of course, when the expression link is still existing. So once you bake your camera down, this will no longer exist. But as you can see, we've got this really interesting setup going on here. So that's a really interesting view for, again, making multiple frames, and that's just if you want to quickly remimic this camera. By itself, this isn't good to us. I mean, we might as well have copied and pasted this camera, but again, an interesting result. The next one I want to show is setting a frame range. So we're going to give basically Nuke a specific frame range in which to run. And this is a little more useful. So I'm going to say between frames 100 and frame 150. If our frame in the viewer is between these two values, I want it to use the frame. So basically, once we've hit 100, it'll start reading. If once we hit 101, it'll be frame 101, frame 102, 103, and it'll keep doing that up until 150. Otherwise, I'm just going to say 0. So if I hit OK, my camera sits at 0, and as you can see, the project cam's not doing anything until it hits 100, and then it's exactly matching the regular camera, and then at 150 it goes back to 0. So again, just an interesting result in how you can quickly set up a range that the camera actually animates across. So again, in this manner, it doesn't do us any good. As you can see, it by it shifting to another frame, that doesn't work really well. So that leads us to our third item here that we can try, which is specifying, instead of saying 0 as our result, let's do another frame check. So again, if we read this across, we're saying if our frame is greater than 100 but it's less than 150, we should specify the frame value for the projected frame. Otherwise, instead of doing 0, let's say if the frame is less than or equal to 100, then let's set it to 100. Otherwise, let it set it to 150. And now this has got a really nice result, where our camera sits still at frame 100 until we hit 100, and then it goes through the frame range, and then at 150 it stops at 150, and it stays that value for the rest of the timeline. So again, we've got this nice little setup here. So once we send that through, we can then read it back through our camera and read it back, merge it on top, and as you can see, we've got a nice little bit going on here with our frame range. So you can see we've matched up camera projection, then we move on. So those are the two scripts that I've got right now. Definitely looking into other items, other little tricks for the camera projections I'm currently looking into, as well as I'm currently working on another script that I'm using that I hope to be putting up here soon. And one final thing I want to discuss about this is I've tried this is in Nuke 6.3 version 8 that I'm running right now, but I have recently been able to use the new beta for Nuke 7 that the Foundry announced at IBC a couple weeks ago. So that's some really big news, and I've tested it out, my previous scripts as well as this one, and they all work in the beta. So hopefully nothing will change between the beta and the final product. No last minute changes that'll change, throw anything off. But it has worked in the Nuke beta and for Nuke 7. And if you get a chance to try and test out the beta, I definitely recommend it, because there are some really great tools and advancements Nuke has now for this type of work, especially the modeling tools for the camera projections. So that just builds on top of what we can do in 3D. And again, that plus our camera projections, merging the two from 3D to 2D, you get some really great results. So hopefully, when that comes out, they'll be able to show more, and hopefully these scripts here will be able to put forth less time in your camera projection setup. So if you have any comments or questions, you leave them below and I'll try to get back to them as soon as possible. And if you have any ideas for future scripts to write or future tutorials that you'd like to see at least on the Nuke interface, just let me know and I'll see what we can do. And if you have a chance, take a look at Nuke 7. It's awesome, some great stuff. So that'll be coming out in a public version soon. I think that pretty much wraps it up. So this is Dave, and have a good one.